Welcome to Conspiracy Files with Zoe Parker. I'm your host, Zoe Parker, and in today's episode, we step into one of the most controversial and secretive topics of our time. The Epstein Island Network represents a shadowy world of power, wealth, and influence, where questions still linger about who was involved and who remains shielded from exposure. This episode will trace its origins, key figures, evidence, and the unanswered mysteries surrounding who is still being protected. The name Jeffrey Epstein did not first emerge in the headlines during his arrest in the summer of 2019. His ties to the highest levels of finance, politics, and science date back decades. Born in Brooklyn in the early 1950s, Epstein worked briefly as a teacher before transitioning into finance. Despite lacking a college degree, he joined the investment bank Bear Stearns and quickly climbed the ranks. His clients reportedly included some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. But the precise nature of his financial operations has remained unusually opaque. By the early 2000s, Epstein had acquired properties across the globe, including a New York mansion valued in the tens of millions, a private jet later dubbed the Lolita Express, and most infamously, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James. It was here that whispers of something darker began to take shape. According to flight logs and testimonies later made public, the island hosted a long list of high-profile guests, some of whom would later deny or minimize their connections to Epstein. The environment that allowed someone like Epstein to thrive was not created overnight. It was nurtured over time by a system where power and secrecy often intersected. During the 1980s and 1990s, regulatory oversight in financial circles was loosening. Private banking and offshore trusts created vast networks through which the ultra-wealthy could operate with limited transparency. In such an environment, someone with Epstein's connections and persuasive charm could accumulate extraordinary access. But it was not just the money that set Epstein apart. It was who he knew. His social circle included 2 U.S. presidents, royal family members, leading scientists, and countless celebrities. Whether these relationships were purely social, transactional, or something more is still a matter of intense scrutiny. What is certain is that his connections gave him protection, legal, political, and reputational, for much longer than might be expected under normal circumstances. The earliest public allegations against Epstein began surfacing in the early 2000s. In 2005, police in Palm Beach, Florida began investigating claims that Epstein had paid underage girls for sexual massages. The case would eventually be handed over to federal prosecutors. But rather than facing the full weight of the law, Epstein negotiated what would later be called a sweetheart deal, a non-prosecution agreement in 2008 that shielded him and unnamed co-conspirators from deeper investigation. He served just 13 months in a county jail. This outcome drew outrage from victims, legal scholars, and journalists. But behind the scenes, it raised another question. How did someone facing such serious allegations manage to avoid meaningful consequences? What forces were at play that allowed this outcome? And more importantly, who else stood to benefit from his silence? These questions would only intensify as the Epstein saga continued to unfold. Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle was not only expansive, it was strategically constructed. He aligned himself with individuals across multiple sectors: politics, royalty, science, and entertainment. Among the most discussed names was Prince Andrew, Duke of York, whose connection to Epstein became a global scandal after a photograph surfaced showing him with Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's accusers, who was a minor at the time. The photo, taken in London in the early 2000s, showed Prince Andrew with his arm around Giuffre's waist, while Ghislaine Maxwell stood in the background. Prince Andrew denied ever meeting her, despite the photograph's existence, and insisted that allegations of his involvement were false. Ghislaine Maxwell was a key figure in Epstein's world. The daughter of British media mogul Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine played a central role in managing Epstein's affairs and, according to court testimonies, in recruiting young girls for him under the guise of employment or mentorship. Many survivors described Ghislaine as the gatekeeper. Friendly at first, but ultimately facilitating introductions that led to abuse. She was arrested in 2020 and later convicted of multiple charges related to sex trafficking and conspiracy. But her trial notably avoided naming any high-profile individuals involved in the broader network, and much of the evidence submitted was sealed from public view. Other names appeared in Epstein's now infamous flight logs, which included passengers aboard his private jet. These records listed numerous celebrities, politicians, and even Nobel Prize-winning scientists. Some individuals confirmed they had flown with Epstein, insisting it was for legitimate reasons such as fundraising or conferences. Others denied involvement entirely. The logs alone do not constitute proof of wrongdoing, but they suggest a level of access and influence that few people have ever attained. One of Epstein's most controversial relationships was with former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Flight logs revealed that Clinton had flown on Epstein's plane multiple times. Clinton later acknowledged some of these trips, stating that Secret Service agents were present and that the travel was related to philanthropic work. However, questions remain about whether all trips were officially recorded and whether there were visits to the island itself. Clinton has denied ever visiting Little St. James, despite conflicting reports and testimony. Another powerful figure whose name became tied to Epstein was Bill Gates. Although Gates' spokesperson claimed their relationship was purely professional and brief, internal documents and statements suggest a more sustained connection. Gates later acknowledged the meetings were a mistake. But as with many others in Epstein's orbit, the full nature of their interactions remains unclear. Even Donald Trump had a documented history with Epstein, appearing in photographs and social settings with him in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Trump later claimed to have had a falling out with Epstein and distanced himself from any suggestion of complicity. Despite speculation, no formal allegations tied Trump to Epstein's crimes, and he has denied all claims of involvement. What emerges is a pattern, not of direct proof implicating every associate, but of a widespread reluctance to fully investigate or publicize the depth of Epstein's network. Legal proceedings have often focused on Epstein and Maxwell as isolated individuals. Yet the breadth of their connections suggests that the real story may extend much further. Who else participated? Who looked the other way? And who remains protected, not by lack of evidence, but by influence? As investigators and journalists began to dig deeper into the Epstein case, a clearer picture of the core claims and pieces of evidence began to emerge. The accusations were not limited to isolated incidents or vague innuendo. Multiple survivors, some now adults, came forward with detailed and consistent accounts of being recruited, trafficked, and abused. Their stories spanned decades and shared striking similarities. Young girls, often from vulnerable backgrounds, were lured with promises of money, education, or career opportunities, only to find themselves ensnared in a system that exploited them for the pleasure of powerful men. One of the most widely reported cases involved Virginia Giuffre, formerly Virginia Roberts. She alleged that she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell at the age of 17 while working at Mar-a-Lago, a private club in Palm Beach, Florida. According to her sworn depositions, she was flown on Epstein's private jet to various locations and forced to have sexual encounters with men whose names she was instructed not to share publicly. Her accounts, later corroborated by travel records and testimony from others, became a cornerstone of the legal battles that followed. Flight logs, pilot statements, and customs records confirmed many of the locations and dates mentioned by Giuffre and others. These documents placed high-profile individuals in proximity to the alleged trafficking operations. While presence alone does not prove participation, the consistency between survivor accounts and logistical data raised serious questions. Why were so many influential figures repeatedly visiting Epstein's properties? Why were multiple young women frequently flying with him? And why were records of these trips not more thoroughly investigated? Photographic evidence also added to the growing mountain of claims. Images of Epstein with various global leaders, academics, and entertainers surfaced in the media. Some photographs showed Epstein attending elite social events, while others captured more casual moments at private residences or on his island. These visuals, combined with testimonies, created a growing sense that Epstein's social network was not just extensive, it was intimate. Then, there was the matter of sealed documents and non-disclosure agreements. Many of Epstein's former employees, pilots, and staff members had signed strict confidentiality contracts. Some later broke their silence, describing what they had witnessed at the various Epstein residences. These included young women being escorted in and out of rooms, massage tables stationed in unusual places, and security systems that recorded almost every movement within the properties. Some even suggested that surveillance footage was routinely collected and archived, perhaps as leverage. In 2019, when Epstein was arrested on federal charges, agents raided his Manhattan townhouse and found a trove of disturbing materials. This included compact discs labeled with names, images of young women, and a hidden safe filled with cash, diamonds, and foreign passports. While some materials were entered into evidence, much of it remains unreleased. The question persists: was this information used to blackmail powerful individuals? And if so, who had access to it? These core claims and pieces of evidence form the basis for understanding why the Epstein case remains so volatile. It is not simply a story of abuse. It is a story of how abuse may have been institutionalized, monetized, and shielded by structures designed to protect the powerful. The facts uncovered so far only scratch the surface. When the details of Epstein's operation began surfacing in court filings and investigative reports, a new focus emerged: the credibility and verification of the evidence itself. Much of what had been alleged was sensational, but many pieces could be cross-checked. Flight logs from Epstein's private jet were submitted under oath, and those logs lined up with several survivors' timelines. Pilots confirmed under deposition that certain passengers were present on specific flights to Little St. James, New Mexico, or Paris. Customs documents matched these dates as well. These materials did not, on their own, prove criminal activity by any particular passenger, but they substantiated a pattern of travel consistent with the survivors' accounts. Depositions from household staff painted a similarly consistent picture. Employees from Epstein's New York mansion and his Palm Beach estate testified about an unending stream of young women visiting under the guise of massages. Security staff described restricted areas, unusual rules, and cameras positioned throughout the properties. One former house manager kept a detailed logbook of visitors, later referred to as the Black Book. That book contained the contact details of hundreds of prominent figures from around the world. Many entries were accompanied by personal notes, flight schedules, or reminders about upcoming visits. Some of the most striking verification came from financial records. Wire transfers, property purchases, and the movement of large sums of money connected to shell companies demonstrated that Epstein was moving funds in ways that made traditional oversight difficult. Offshore accounts and trusts based in the Virgin Islands or other secrecy jurisdictions concealed not only assets, but also the potential beneficiaries of those funds. This network of entities gave him the appearance of vast wealth without clear documentation of how it was earned. At the same time, journalists and researchers found inconsistencies and gaps in the public record. Certain flight logs were incomplete. Some visitor names were redacted. Surveillance footage from Epstein's jail cell during his first suicide attempt was said to be missing. Documents seized during the raids remain sealed under court order. These missing pieces fuel speculation that critical evidence may have been withheld or destroyed to protect high-profile individuals. The case of Ghislaine Maxwell offered a revealing glimpse into how evidence can be selectively handled. During her trial in 2021, prosecutors chose not to pursue charges involving specific prominent figures named in civil suits. Large portions of the witness testimony and exhibits were sealed. Despite a conviction on sex trafficking and conspiracy charges, no new indictments were issued for any other alleged co-conspirators, even though Epstein's plea deal from 2008 had explicitly mentioned unnamed individuals. This left many observers asking whether the full network had been deliberately shielded. Even within government agencies, questions about oversight persisted. Why was Epstein's status as a registered sex offender in Florida treated leniently compared to others? Why was he allowed to travel internationally without triggering closer scrutiny? And why did it take more than a decade after the first investigation for federal prosecutors to bring new charges? These verifiable facts and unexplained gaps form the heart of the ongoing mystery. They suggest a system where some evidence is confirmed, some is hidden, and some may never be revealed, leaving the public to piece together a fragmented puzzle. While the weight of evidence against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell is substantial, not everyone agrees on the scope or implications of the case. Many researchers, legal analysts, and journalists have raised questions about how much of the narrative has been shaped by media sensationalism, political bias, or public misunderstanding. Alternative viewpoints argue that while Epstein clearly committed serious crimes, the extent of the conspiracy has been exaggerated by speculation and online echo chambers. Some critics caution against overinterpreting flight logs or photographs. They point out that Epstein maintained a wide social network, often mingling with people at public events, conferences, or fundraisers. Just because a name appeared in a contact book or a person flew on Epstein's plane does not prove criminal involvement. In high society circles, it is not uncommon for individuals to share jets, attend galas, or appear in photo ops without fully understanding the backgrounds of those around them. From this perspective, guilt by association is a dangerous standard. There are also concerns about the reliability of some witness statements. In high-profile cases, memory can become distorted, timelines can blur, and the pressure to conform to a dominant narrative can influence testimony. Defense attorneys during Maxwell's trial emphasized the lack of physical evidence, tying many claims to specific dates or locations. They argued that some of the accusations relied heavily on recollections from events that took place 20 years earlier, sometimes without supporting documentation. Journalists and skeptics have pointed out that the virality of the Epstein story on social media has encouraged a rush to judgment. Complex legal proceedings have been condensed into memes or 20-second videos, often lacking context. As a result, certain names have been circulated online without substantial evidence, placing individuals under public suspicion without due process. Critics argue that this undermines legitimate justice by replacing thorough investigation with speculation. There are also legal and procedural explanations for why certain aspects of the case remain sealed or redacted. Court records involving minors, victims of abuse, or national security concerns are often protected to prevent re-traumatization or to preserve ongoing investigations. Some sealed files may contain personal information that, if released, could jeopardize the privacy of survivors rather than shield perpetrators. These justifications are standard in sensitive cases, even though they also leave room for mistrust and conspiracy to flourish. Additionally, some observers argue that focusing too much on Epstein's circle distracts from broader systemic issues. They suggest that the case reveals deeper problems within law enforcement, the judicial system, and financial oversight. The real conspiracy in this view is not a hidden cabal of elites, but a structural failure to hold the wealthy and powerful accountable under the same laws that govern everyone else. From this angle, the Epstein scandal is not unique. It is a symptom of a wider breakdown in transparency, justice, and institutional responsibility. While these alternative viewpoints do not erase the serious allegations or the evidence that has come to light, they provide important context. Not every name on a manifest is a criminal. Not every photo implies complicity. And not every gap in the record proves a cover-up. But in a case where so much remains unanswered, skepticism itself has become part of the narrative, either as a tool of accountability or as a defense against the truth. The Epstein case has had far-reaching implications that go well beyond individual guilt or innocence. It has forced a broader reckoning with the way power functions in modern society, how influence is acquired, how secrets are kept, and how accountability can be shaped by wealth. At its core, the story of Epstein's rise and protection is not just about one man. It is about a global structure that appears, in many ways, designed to protect those at the top while silencing those at the margins. One of the most striking aspects of the case is how long it took for Epstein to be meaningfully prosecuted, despite warnings and reports going back more than a decade. From the outside, it seems clear that he benefited from an unspoken alliance between law enforcement, legal institutions, and private influence. Powerful attorneys negotiated secret plea deals. Prosecutors downplayed the scope of the charges. Media outlets failed to pursue the story aggressively for years. This was not a failure of information. It was a failure of action. The case also exposed how power is protected not only through legal mechanisms, but through social networks. Epstein's wealth allowed him to endow institutions, donate to universities, and fund scientific research. In return, he gained access to thinkers, politicians, and cultural figures. These relationships created a feedback loop of credibility. His presence in elite circles made people less likely to question his behavior. And because he was seen as connected, institutions were more hesitant to challenge him. The survivors, by contrast, had little to protect them. Many came from working-class families or unstable homes. Some had already experienced trauma or marginalization before encountering Epstein. Their voices were discounted for years. They were painted as unreliable, opportunistic, or confused. It was only after public outrage, mounting evidence, and journalistic persistence that they were finally heard on a national level. Even then, many felt justice had not truly been served. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about how society processes scandal. When details are shocking or grotesque, there is often a tendency to treat them as isolated, exceptional cases. But if Epstein's operation was as extensive and well protected as it appears, then it suggests a more systemic problem. It hints at an infrastructure of exploitation that can operate in plain sight, provided the participants are wealthy, well-connected, or useful to others in power. Epstein's death inside a federal detention center only deepened this perception. Officially ruled a suicide, the circumstances surrounding his death sparked international disbelief. Surveillance cameras reportedly malfunctioned. Cellmates were transferred. Guards fell asleep or falsified records. And crucial footage was lost. For many, these failures were too many to accept as coincidence. Whether or not foul play was involved, the optics confirmed what critics had long suspected, that some people are simply too dangerous, not because of what they might do, but because of what they already know. This case has become a symbol, not only of individual corruption, but of institutional collapse. It challenges the idea that justice is blind, that truth will always emerge, or that the system works. And it forces a difficult question. If so many people knew or suspected or whispered, why did nothing stop it? Why did it take so long to act? And how many other networks like this still operate beneath the surface, untouched and undisturbed? As the Epstein saga unfolded, media coverage surged, but so did public distrust in how that coverage was shaped. In the early years of the case, major outlets showed limited interest. Allegations surfaced as early as the mid-2000s, yet most mainstream media organizations avoided sustained reporting. In some cases, they actively suppressed it. One well-known example involved a journalist from a major news network who was caught on a leaked recording expressing frustration that her story on Epstein had been buried. She claimed to have had interviews, photographs, and corroborating evidence, but that legal pressure and outside influence kept the report from airing. The clip sparked outrage when it went public, feeding the belief that media institutions were complicit, either through fear or protection. The dynamics of media narratives became central to how the Epstein case was understood by the public. Independent journalists and alternative media platforms were often the first to report on the connections between Epstein and global elites. Many of these stories gained traction online, outside the traditional gatekeepers of information. As public interest grew, legacy media outlets were forced to catch up. They began publishing exposés and conducting interviews, but questions remained about why the story had been downplayed for so long. Social media played a critical role in amplifying public attention. Hashtags, documentaries, podcasts, and viral threads exposed details that might otherwise have remained obscure. But this flood of content also brought challenges. Misinformation blended with fact. False accusations circulated freely. Genuine victims and whistleblowers were often lost in the noise. The decentralized nature of online storytelling allowed powerful truths to surface. But it also created an environment where speculation sometimes outpaced evidence. This tension between exposure and distortion has shaped how the Epstein conspiracy is perceived. On one hand, it has empowered everyday people to question authority and demand transparency. On the other, it has made it harder to separate verified fact from sensational rumor. Some names circulated purely because they were famous. Others were linked without context. For those genuinely connected to Epstein's operations, this lack of clarity often worked in their favor. In the blur of information overload, accountability became harder to pursue. Meanwhile, entertainment media began incorporating elements of the case into television, film, and fiction. Dramatized versions of the events were created, some accurate, others speculative. This brought the story to a wider audience, but it also softened its impact. For some viewers, the Epstein case became another shocking series, absorbed and then forgotten. The horror became entertainment, the victims became characters, and the system that enabled it remained largely untouched. Still, the cultural imprint of the case is undeniable. Epstein's name is now shorthand for elite corruption and hidden networks. It has become a symbol of everything people suspect but cannot prove. And it has revealed how fragile our systems of truth can be, how easily stories are buried, how quickly narratives shift, and how difficult it is to hold power accountable when the media itself is entangled in the same web. Beyond the established facts and legal proceedings, there exists a layer of speculation that continues to expand the Epstein narrative into darker, more complex territory. These are the theories that live at the edge of public understanding, widely discussed but rarely proven, whispered in online forums, alternative media, and insider leaks. While mainstream sources often shy away from these topics, they form an essential part of the ongoing curiosity surrounding the case. One of the most persistent theories is that Epstein was not simply a criminal operating independently, but an asset, either for intelligence agencies or for powerful private networks. Supporters of this theory point to the nature of his connections, the apparent protection he received for so many years, and the suggestion that he may have used his properties and surveillance systems to gather compromising material on his guests. If true, this would mean that Epstein's role extended far beyond personal gratification. It would imply that he operated as part of a larger machine, collecting blackmail, managing influence, and feeding information into systems designed to manipulate global power structures. This idea gained traction after reports emerged of hidden cameras placed in nearly every room of Epstein's homes. Former staff described sophisticated surveillance equipment and the presence of discrete recording devices. Some suggested that every encounter, every visit, was documented. If so, where are those tapes now? Who controls them? Were they destroyed, hidden, or weaponized? Another widely discussed topic involves the fate of Epstein's wealth and records after his death. In the weeks following his reported suicide in August of 2019, there were significant shifts in his financial holdings. Trusts were restructured. Assets were moved offshore. Some properties were quickly transferred or sold. Critics have questioned whether these moves were designed to shield information or to preserve wealth for others involved in his operations. Then there is the speculation surrounding Ghislaine Maxwell's silence. After her arrest, many expected that she would name names in exchange for leniency, but no such revelations were made public. Some believe that any deal was made behind closed doors. Others think she may be protecting individuals even more powerful than Epstein himself. There are those who believe she, too, may have been part of a generational network, raised in the world of intelligence, influence, and secrets. Fringe theories extend even further, touching on ideas that Epstein's Island was part of something ancient or symbolic. Observers have noted the unusual architecture on Little St. James, including a temple-like structure with ceremonial markings and color schemes associated with occult rituals. While much of this is speculative, it taps into a broader narrative that elite power often intersects with esoteric belief systems. Some researchers argue that Epstein's properties may have been more than mere hideaways. They may have functioned as stages for ritualized displays of dominance, secrecy, or initiation. The lack of closure fuels these theories. With so many documents sealed, so many questions unanswered, and so many powerful figures still unaccountable, speculation fills the vacuum. Not because people are irrational, but because the official story feels incomplete. In a world where conspiracies are often dismissed as fiction, the Epstein case is a rare moment when the outlines of conspiracy were made visible. And that visibility invites the question, if this was real, what else might be? The story of Jeffrey Epstein and the network surrounding him is not easily contained. It stretches across continents, institutions, and decades. What began as a criminal investigation into one man's abuse of power has grown into something far more complex, a reflection of systemic failure, cultural denial, and the unsettling question of who holds real power in the modern world. In the wake of his death, efforts to uncover the full truth have continued, but slowly. Civil suits have been filed against Epstein's estate. Victims have sought damages and public acknowledgement. Some records have been unsealed, though many remain under court protection. The Department of Justice has claimed to be investigating others connected to the case, yet few additional indictments have followed. For the public, the silence feels deafening. For the survivors, justice still feels incomplete. The legacy of the case now lives in its unanswered questions. Why did it take so long for authorities to act? Who else was involved? Why are some names protected while others are exposed? And perhaps most hauntingly, how many other operations like this may still exist, hidden in plain sight, shielded by money, protected by power, and ignored by institutions that are supposed to safeguard the vulnerable? Despite the gravity of the crimes, the world moved on. Headlines faded, trials ended, the news cycle shifted, but the deeper truths linger. What the Epstein case revealed is that networks of influence can be used not only to advance careers or protect assets, but to conceal abuse, silence victims, and bury evidence. That is not a theory. That is what happened. And it is this reality that gives the story such lasting resonance. It challenges the assumption that truth always rises, that justice always prevails, or that wrongdoing can be exposed by simply pulling back the curtain. What happens when those behind the curtain control the narrative? What happens when silence is enforced not through threats, but through distraction, delay, and legal maneuvering? The question of who is still being protected remains unresolved. It is not just about the names we recognize, but about the infrastructure that allowed someone like Epstein to operate for so long without consequence. It is about the attorneys who negotiated his immunity, the institutions that accepted his donations, the executives who looked the other way, and the agencies that failed to act, even when given the chance. For some, the Epstein case is a scandal. For others, it is a symbol. But for those who believe in transparency and accountability, it is a warning. Power does not just protect itself, it insulates, it erases, and when necessary, it replaces the truth with something easier to digest. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Conspiracy Files with Zoe Parker. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show and unlock bonus content, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.